I'm going to go straight to the news flashing on your screens at the moment. This is big news. The Central Board of Direct Taxes has put out a roadmap to phase out corporate tax exemptions that are currently in place. This is in line with the Finance Minister Arun Jaitley's proposal to phase out exemptions and bring the corporate tax rate lower to 25% in 4 years. Here's what we know as of now. Tax exemptions that are based on profits and investments will be scrapped, and so will be the area-based exemptions. This is starting FY18. There will be no weighted tax deduction. However, no modification so far has been made to the sunset clause as far as income tax goes. Let's discuss this more. Satya Podar of EY now joining us live right here on CNBC-TV18. Thanks, Mr. Podar. This is Nayantara. You know, we've all been waiting for this roadmap. It was promised to us by end of November. This is all we know right now. The CBDT saying it's going to phase out profit-linked, investment-linked and area-based tax deductions for companies, and there will be no weighted tax deduction from FY18, and will not make any modification to the sunset date in income tax. If I could first begin by getting your initial reaction.
Well, first of all, this is a welcome move, but any kind of a change of this nature, the devil is in the details, and the details are still awaited. I don't know how much of the details are provided in the announcement, the roadmap proposed by the government. And it's only when the details are available that the public will be able to assess the impact of the phase out of these incentives. But still, I think my own feeling is that government is doing it very methodically, as opposed to rushing into phasing out these incentives with a change in the sunset clause. They are really going to let the sunset date remain as it is and not renew the incentives beyond that date. So that's a welcome move. It's a very sensible move. And I think overall, the selective incentives are also a source of complexity, and they lead to a lot of disputes. Government has been saying that most of the disputes, 90% or more, relate to the selective incentives provided in the tax system. And by getting rid of these selective incentives, hopefully the disputes will go down as well.
But Mr. Podar, with what has been announced today, and of course, like you said, the devil is in the detail, do you think all of this is going to be possible in 4 years? In 4 years from now, we will indeed see that 25% tax rate?
Yes, indeed it is possible. Only thing is that if the minister is not going to change the sunset dates for some of these incentives, then it's a question which of those incentives will expire normally within the next 4 years or not. I'll give you an example. Say the SEZ incentives. SEZs qualify for the 5-year tax holiday of 100% on export profits and a reduced holiday for the next 5 years. Now, there's no sunset clause on the SEZ holidays. Now, I'm not very clear at this stage whether the sunset this SEZ incentives, which is a profit-linked incentive, will be maintained, will be phased out. If so, when will it be phased out? So those are the types of details which we are still awaiting.
Okay, I'm going to ask you to hang in there, Mr. Podar. We're joined by another expert as well, Gokul Chaudhri of BMR. Thanks, Gokul. This is Nayantara here. You know what the CBDT so far has announced, and like I was just briefing Mr. Podar as well, it has said it's releasing a roadmap for phasing out corporate tax exemptions. It will phase out profit-linked, investment-linked and area-based tax deductions for companies. There will be no weighted tax deduction from FY18, and it will not make any modification to any of the sunset dates available in the Income Tax Act. So Gokul, you know what Satya was telling us was that this is a very welcome move, that at least the government is not going to tinker with the sunset clauses and bring about confusion. I wanted to first get your reaction on about phasing out the profit-linked, investment-linked and area-based deductions. I don't know by when that is going to take place.
Well, Nayantara, it's something which has been in the works for a while. The Finance Minister had spoken about a phased sunset clauses to the various exemptions. And he'd also said that he's going to try and bring down the corporate tax rate in tandem. Now, the roadmap for this has been under the works for a while in the Ministry of Finance, and it is widely expected that the Finance Ministry has taken even the PMO on board with the roadmap that has been proposed. Now, we are expecting that the details of this would be made available to the public at large, now that it's also, as is believed, to have got the sign-off from the Prime Minister himself. Now, what we can expect is the fact that, like they have assured, that they would not like to tinker with what is already in the rule book. Therefore, all the sunset clauses that currently are there are expected to stay on course. So therefore, if there is a certain timeline for phasing out the tax holiday for power plants, then the government will not predate it or postpone it either. But all those clauses which do not have a sunset will be given a sunset by means of this particular roadmap that is being proposed. So therefore, there are different provisions. Some of these are production-based tax holidays, some are exemption-based tax holidays, and there are certain incentives based on investments that you make on the basis of geography or capital expenditure. So I think in relation to all of these provisions, the sunset dates will be prescribed. We are also expecting that even in some cases where production sharing contracts are there with the Government of India, where some tax holidays of 7 years have been proposed when production begins, even there we may expect to see that they may put a date by which the production needs to begin, and therefore the tax holiday needs to begin and end.
So that could lead to more confusion because people planning investments have assumed 7 years from then, but you're saying perhaps we could see tinkering over there. If I could also bring in tax expert Ketan Dalal into this conversation. Now, Ketan, thanks for joining us here on CNBC-TV18. We're talking about the roadmap that has been released for phasing out corporate exemptions. Of course, the end target to have 25% in 4 years. The government saying it's not going to tinker with sunset clauses that are existing at the moment, that we will not see any modification. Do you think it's going to be as easy as that, or that perhaps there will be some interpretation changes that will go forward to ensure that the 4-year roadmap remains sacrosanct?
Nayantara, I think while we need to go into details, I think from what I'm hearing and reading of the brief press note, I think it's fairly clear that they will not tinker with it, and I think that's the right way to go about it. Incidentally, I may mention that in most of the cases, not all, but most of the cases, if I recall correctly, the sunset date is March 17. But it is not income arising up to March 17. It is if the activity commences. So, for example, if a power plant commences by 31st March, it will continue to get the exemption. In some cases of exemptions, it is 5 years, and in some cases, it is 10 years. So they will continue to get the exemption beyond March 17 so long as they fulfill the condition of commencement. And that is, I think, the correct way to go about it, because we are just 16 months away from 2017 March. And, let's say a power plant is in process of completion. They obviously have done their economics on the basis of such an exemption. And I think the government is rightly mentioning that they will not tinker with that. But at the same time, they will not extend it, which I think sounds fair, especially since it was announced in the budget by the finance minister in February 2015, earlier this year.
Okay, I'm now going to bring Satya Podar back into this conversation. Mr. Podar, we've got the other two experts' views now on what they think of modification, maybe putting pressure on the power companies as well as the oil and gas companies to commence operations. But, they're also saying there will be no weighted tax deduction from FY18. What exactly does this mean? And interestingly, it's FY18 and not AY18.
I think that's simply the commencement date for FY. Presumably, that I think it means what it says, that it's not the assessment year, but it's the fiscal year. So any investments made which qualify for the weighted deduction, and FY18 most likely refers to the year in which the investments are made. Now, they could be claimed in assessment year, which is different from FY18. So I think that part to me is fairly clear until I get more details. But from this brief thing, I don't think there's much significance other than the effective date when this reduction is phased out. I
know to talk about it, there will be no exemptions now based on area. there will be no area-based tax deductions. Mr. Poddar, what is that going to mean for, if I may call it, competitive federalism, cooperative federalism? Because we've seen a lot of states go out there trying to get investments. For example, let's say Pantnagar or other areas which have been offering all kinds of tax breaks to make large investments. What does all of that mean for that kind of a policy?
Well, the scope of these changes is only limited to the incentives provided under the Income Tax Act by the center. So the states are providing area-based incentives, that those can continue, and that's not a problem. It's only the central incentives which will not be presumably continued beyond the sunset date. But as I mentioned here, one of the biggest incentives, which is in quantity or in volume, is the incentive for the SEZ. Now, in the case of SEZ, the government has been under pressure to broaden those incentives by removing the application of MAT, minimum alternate tax. And the government has resisted those pressures from the industry to enrich the incentives for SEZ. Because as I mentioned before, they qualify for the 5-year tax export holiday in the first 5 years, 100%, and the reduced one after the first 5 years. I'm frankly doubtful that the government will tinker with that incentive, even though it is a profit-based incentive, profit-linked incentive.
Mr. Dalal, how would you read it?
By saying that they have already applied the minimum alternate tax to SEZ's profits, but that MAT also applies to all of the types of profit incentives, which are profit-linked or area-based. So I'm not sure whether there'll be some degree of selection, which of these area-based or profit-linked incentives will be maintained and which ones will be phased out.
Okay, so you're saying that the big one we have to watch out for is what the government decides with respect to SEZs. Mr. Ketan Dalal, if I could ask you to join into this conversation now. You've just heard what Mr. Satya Poddar had to say. He's not sure how the government is going to reconcile this, the tax incentive that you get for the first 5 years, 100%, and beyond that. How would you interpret this?
In a sense, the sense I get overall from reading, although I don't think they have mentioned the word SEZ, is, and I'm not saying it is either the right thing to do or the wrong thing to do. I'm not really competent to comment on that. But it sounds to me that that could also be impacted. And also to carry on the point that Mr. Satya Poddar made, the MAT is roughly 20% and the tax rate is 33.66 today. So roughly, let's say 34. So about 14% is the tax saving, so to speak. Although actually SEZs were never supposed to pay any tax originally and MAT was never even there. So in a sense, the MAT exemption has been partly rolled back already through MAT in the last few years. And what it seems to me is that it is possible that that may also go. And of course, there is a larger question there of India's competitiveness from an export standpoint, the pricing pressures, the yuan devaluation and things like that. But that's really an economic conversation, not a tax conversation. But yes, the possibility that it will be withdrawn is something which seems to me very likely from what I am reading in the press note.
And these are for all kinds of SEZs, Mr. Dalal, right? Whether it's manufacturing, gem and jewelry, IT parks, etc.
Yeah, I would think so. I don't think first of all, Nayantara, they have not mentioned the word SEZ. But in a sense, it's area-based because the area could be the SEZ area also. So I think that this would go across. I think we have to step back here and see the larger issue. What the government seems to be saying was, look, the exemptions in their view is distorting the way the tax is levied. So exemptions and deductions should be phased out, and we are willing to reduce the tax rates, but please do not expect the exemptions to continue. That seems to be the kind of narrative that is coming through, and I think there is a merit in that. And of course, there could always be exceptions. Could SEZ be one of them? Could R&D weighted deduction be another? So that's a much larger conversation. But as a broad brush comment, I think that theme seems to be not unjustified, frankly.
Okay, now, gentlemen, I have the detailed press release. Mr. Poddar, I'm just going to come to you with my final question to you. It says here very clearly, in case of tax incentives with no terminal date, a sunset date of 31st March 2017 will be provided either for commencement of the activity or for claim of benefit depending upon the structure of the relevant provision of the Act. Does this bring about any more clarity for what we were discussing?
Very significant clarity, because as one of the, commentators mentioned before, that even if incentive was available, say the power plants up to a certain date, that incentive could have continued for another 5 or 10 years once the power plant was set up within the eligibility period. Now, what this press release is implying is that even in that case, the activity profits beyond this FY17 will no longer qualify for the tax holiday. That's a very significant change, and that could lead to a lot of controversy. I'm not saying it's wrong or right, because anytime you phase out these incentives, some controversy will be created, especially from those who are going to lose the benefit.
Okay, so you're expecting controversies, and I guess that would also mean litigation, Mr. Poddar, from what you're saying, depending on the interpretation. But gentlemen, we have run out of time, so I have to wrap up this conversation now. But this is the big story we're tracking at CNBC-TV18, the roadmap being released to reduce corporate tax rate from 30% to 25%. And we've seen a roadmap which also deals with no changes as far as the sunset clause goes. But like Mr. Poddar was pointing out, we could perhaps see some controversy, since the government is now saying there will be no terminal date, that is a sunset date of 31st March 2017, will be provided either for commencement of the activity or for the claim of benefit. A story that's just broken, we'll be right on top of. We haven't taken a commercial break in a while, so we're going to take one now. Stay tuned. We're back with plenty of news and updates.